Imagine walking into your dining room and finding your grandmother's body laid out on the table, not in a casket, but on the very table where family gathered just the night before. Her jaw is tied shut with cloth, cotton stuffed into her nostrils. Your mother washes her arms with a cool rag, and no one seems to find this strange. For centuries, across cultures, that scene was simply called Tuesday. Yet in a single generation in America, all of it vanished. Strangers in black suits arrived, took the body away, charging a fortune for what families once did with love and care. This monumental shift wasn't born from medical advancements or cultural awakenings. It was born from war. To understand how everything changed, we must go back to 1850, rural Pennsylvania. A farmer named Elias awakens before dawn, just as he always does. By the time sunlight breaks through the trees, his father has passed away, the heart giving out in the night. His wife heats water on the stove while his mother finds a clean shirt and trousers. The two women wash the body from head to foot, stopping up the nose and mouth with rags. They place coins over the eyelids to keep them shut, laying him on a cooling board, two chairs propping a wide board beneath the lifeless form. This was not a backward tradition practiced by the ignorant. This was the norm. Families across America, Europe, and most of the world managed their dead the same way they managed births. Death was handled at home because, quite simply, there was nowhere else to do it. Handing over a father's body to a stranger would have been seen as... At the heart of this tradition lay the parlor. Every American home that could afford one had a parlor, a formal room reserved for significant occasions. Weddings were celebrated there, courtships blossomed, and when death came, the body was laid in the parlor for neighbors and relatives to pay their respects. The wake lasted 1 to 3 days, the duration depending on the season. In summer, families moved quickly. Decomposition in the July heat could make a body unbearable within a day. They packed ice around the corpse. In winter, with frozen ground, bodies sometimes sat in outbuildings for weeks until the earth thawed enough for burial. Women orchestrated the entire operation. The same women who delivered babies were often the ones who prepared the dead. They knew how to position limbs before rigor mortis set in, which herbs masked the smell, and the proper prayers to say while washing. Children witnessed it all. A 6-year-old in 1850 would watch their grandmother's body being washed, sit in the parlor during the wake, and follow behind the homemade wooden coffin to the burial site in the family plot. Death was not obscured. It happened in the home, part of life, intertwined with living. Surprisingly, no one emerged traumatized from this process. Grief was real and devastating, just as it is today, but caring for a body, washing a beloved mother, father, or child, was seen as a final act of love. You didn't hand that over to someone else, just as you wouldn't entrust feeding an infant to a stranger if you could. Yet change was on the horizon. Within a few decades, an entire industry would rise, convincing millions that the tender care their grandmothers provided with bare hands was primitive, unsanitary, and dangerous. In April 1861, the first shots of the Civil War rang out at Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina. Within months, young men from every state were dying in staggering numbers. By war's end, around 620,000 soldiers had perished, more Americans than in World War I. World War II. The old system had worked well until this point. Someone died and the family handled it, but the Civil War shattered that norm unexpectedly. For the first time in American history, massive numbers died far from home. Picture it. A farmer's son from Vermont succumbs at the Battle of Antietam in Maryland. His family longs for his return, to wash and dress him, to bury him in the family plot. But in September 1862, the body lies in a field under the late summer sun. By the time it could be transporting back to Vermont, there would be nothing. Desperation enveloped families, especially the wealthy, who wrote pleading letters for their sons to be returned. Into this turmoil stepped Dr. Thomas Holmes, a New York physician experimenting with chemical preservation techniques borrowed from French anatomists. He discovered that injecting arsenic-based chemicals into a corpse's arteries could slow decomposition for weeks, sometimes months. Holmes set up shop near battlefields, offering his services to grieving families for a fee. Rarely mentioned, he wasn't part of any military program, but a private entrepreneur who seized the opportunity presented by mass death. Over the course of the war, he embalmed over 4,000 soldiers. charging families around $100 per body, an astounding $3,000 in today's current. Other embalmers soon followed, erecting tents near battlefields, advertising in newspapers, and vying for business. This operation was completely unregulated. Anyone with a syringe and a bottle of chemicals could claim to be an embalmer. The army itself was perplexed, leading Union commanders to issue orders limiting where embalmers could set up, as their tents interfered with military operations. Yet, what went unnoticed was the profound impact on American culture. Embalming didn't just preserve bodies, it shifted expectations of how the deceased should appear. Prior to the war, death was witnessed in all its rawness: discoloration, bloating, and the unmistakable smell. Families saw their loved ones change over days in the parlor. Embalming obscured that reality. A properly embalmed body appeared peaceful, as though simply asleep. That transformation in perception was destined to last. On April 15, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated at Ford's Theater. His body was embalmed, placed in an elaborate casket, and loaded onto a funeral train that traveled 1,700 miles over 13 days, stopping in cities across the eastern United States for public view. Millions stood in line to glimpse Lincoln's preserved corpse. In Philadelphia alone, over 300,000 people passed the open casket in one day. They saw a president who had been dead nearly 2 weeks yet still looked as though he were merely sleeping. This funeral train did more to normalize professional death care than any advertisement ever could, transforming the public's perception. For ordinary Americans, the preservation they witnessed seemed far superior to their own home rituals. The cooling board, the coins on the eyes, the vinegar-soaked cloth. What they had once considered normal now appeared crude and outdated. The war ended, and surviving soldiers returned home, but embalmers didn't revert to being regular physicians or chemists. They had unearthed a profitable model. They realized that grief was a business. Families, in their most vulnerable moments, would pay almost anything to soften the harsh reality of death. Once convinced that professionals should handle the deceased, it became nearly impossible to persuade them to return to self-care. Within a decade of the war's conclusion, embalming parlors sprouted in cities nationwide. The men running these establishments needed a new title, something respectable that didn't evoke battlefield memories. They became undertakers. But soon, even that title felt too grim, leading them to rebrand as funeral directors. The first necessity was a building. Embalming had occurred in tents, barns, and on kitchen tables during the war, and thus, in the 1870s and 1880s, dedicated funeral parlors emerged in American cities. These commercial spaces were designed for the preparation and display of the dead. For the first time, the body left the family home, marking a significant shift in logistics and language. When the parlor was the site of laying out the dead, every home had one. Now, with the funeral industry creating its own parlors, the word began to. Families shunned spaces that echoed with the reminder of death. By the early 1900s, architects and developers began reimagining that front room, giving it a new name: the living room. Each time the term is uttered, it whispers of a past where the funeral industry redefined parlor as a place of sorrow. What followed was not merely growth. It was a calculated effort to convince Americans of their incapacity to perform a task their ancestors had managed for centuries. Funeral directors launched a subtle yet potent campaign through medical journals, women's magazines, and local newspapers. Their message was clear: handling the dead at home was a threat. It brought disease into the family. It traumatized children. The implication was stark: a family that cared for their own dead was either impoverished or ignorant. This narrative was devoid of scientific backing. A deceased body, untouched by autopsy or specific diseases, posed little risk to those handling it. Yet the funeral industry understood a vital truth: fear, not fact, drove decisions. Nothing incites fear quite like a grieving mother told her deceased child could bring illness to the living. And then there were the caskets. For most of American history, the dead rested in simple wooden coffins, crafted by family or local carpenters. Hexagonal, narrow at the head and feet, broad at the shoulders. Functional and affordable. But the funeral industry transformed these into lavish rectangular caskets, made from hardwood, then metal, later sealed steel, with gaskets, velvet linings, and ornate handles. With each upgrade came a price hike and a sales pitch. The fancier the casket, the deeper the love for the person within. What had once been a family-built structure for the price of lumber became a luxury item, costing more than the average monthly salary of a working-class American by the mid-20th century. By 1960, the American funeral industry had ballooned into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. Embalming became an assumed necessity, despite no legal requirement in most states for standard burials. Families found themselves purchasing sealed caskets, concrete vaults, elaborate floral arrangements, printed programs, and limousine services, all accompanied by preparation fees that covered everything from washing the body to applying cosmetics. Feeling invincible, the industry was unaware of an impending storm, one that would shake its very foundations. Jessica Mitford, a British-born investigative journalist, was poised to expose the truth. In 1963, she unveiled The American Way of Death, a searing examination of the funeral industry's operations. She chronicled the upselling tactics that preyed on grieving families, revealing how directors showcased the most expensive options by placing cheap caskets in dimly lit rooms next to opulent models. The book captured the public's attention, selling out its first printing almost instantly, remaining on bestseller lists for months. The funeral industry retaliated, attacking Mitford personally, labeling her an outsider who misunderstood American customs surrounding death. Instead of changing course, funeral directors fortified their defenses, pushing state legislatures to pass licensing laws making it illegal for families to bury their own dead without a licensed director. By the 1980s, the average American funeral cost exceeded $4,000. In 2000, it surpassed $6,000. By 2020, the median crossed $9,000, excluding cemetery plots, headstones, or burial vaults. A family in 1850 could bury their dead for the price of a pine coffin and an afternoon's labor. Contrast that with 2020, where families were expected to spend amounts exceeding some annual savings for the same outcome. A body in the ground, yet the financial burden was only part of the toll. The deeper cost was psychological, a toll measured over decades. Imagine a child in rural Ohio, 1850, witnessing their grandmother's death in the back bedroom. They sit vigil with the body as their mother washes it, feeling the cold skin, assisting in carrying the wooden coffin to the family burial plot, watching their father shovel dirt into the grave. That child knew death intimately, through touch and scent, through the earth and wood. Now, picture a child a century later in suburban Ohio, told that grandma has simply gone to sleep. They are taken to a funeral home, where strangers prepare her for viewing. The child sees a version of grandma in a silk-lined box, her face made up, akin to a wax figure. They are dissuaded from touching her, confined to a room filled with folding chairs and organ music. Then, they drive to a cemetery where a suited man recites words, and the box is lowered into the ground. This child never witnesses the dirt, never carries anything, never engages with death. This transformation created a society genuinely fearful of the dead. Americans evolved from those who washed their parents' corpses to individuals unable to bear being near an open casket without feeling queasy. This shift was no accident. It arose because an industry removed the public from the process until it became completely alien. Grief researchers observed a significant trend in the late 20th century. Families who took part in caring for their dead reported different grief outcomes than those who delegated everything to funeral homes. Families that touched their dead felt a sense of closure, as if they had completed one final act of love. In contrast, those who outsourced the process often felt disconnected, as though the reality of death had never truly registered in their hearts. Cross-cultural evidence supports this realization. In Jewish tradition, the Shevra Kadisha, a burial society, washes and dresses the body as a sacred duty. In Muslim communities worldwide, family members perform ghusl, a ritual washing, considered a final act of respect. Rural communities in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and parts of Southeast Asia still practice home burial. These societies have not developed higher rates of trauma surrounding death. In fact, research suggests the opposite. Cultures maintaining physical contact, with the dead often report lower rates of complicated grief and prolonged mourning disorders. The American model of sanitized, outsourced death stands as a historical anomaly. Additionally, modern American burial practices pump an estimated 800,000 gallons of embalming fluid into the ground each year, much of it formaldehyde, a known carcinogen. The hardwood and metal caskets consume millions of board feet of timber and tons of steel annually. Concrete burial vaults add another layer of material that will persist underground for centuries without decomposition. All this to achieve what a simple cotton shroud and a 3-foot hole in the earth could accomplish flawlessly for millennia. Yet something is stirring. Quietly, without fanfare, an increasing number of American families are saying no. The modern home funeral movement gained momentum in the early 2000s, driven by families who assess the costs, the chemicals, and the impersonal nature of modern funerals, determining to undertake the care themselves. Organizations like the National Home Funeral Alliance provide guides, training, and legal resources for families wishing to honor their dead as their ancestors did. This aspect often surprises many. In most American states, home funerals are entirely legal. Only a few states necessitate the involvement of a licensed funeral director in the burial process. Most families can keep a body at home, wash and dress it, place it in a shroud or simple wooden box, and bury it on private land, provided they file the correct paperwork and adhere to local zoning regulations. They provide emotional support during the wake, guiding families through the delicate process of home burial. Not funeral directors, they offer no caskets or embalming services. Instead, they help families reclaim a lost intimacy, reminding them how to honor their loved ones in their own way. The families who embrace this path share a strikingly similar experience. They recount the weight of the body, the coldness of the skin, and the profound intimacy of buttoning a shirt over a chest that no longer breathes. They reflect on how this farewell starkly contrasts with the sterile atmosphere of a funeral home, where the deceased is altered to appear as something other than themselves. For many, this is the first time they truly This narrative transcends the traditional confines of funeral homes, embalming, and caskets. These are mere details, not the essence. Somewhere along the journey, Western culture shifted, viewing death as a problem to be managed rather than a reality to confront. We handed over the most human of experiences to professionals, losing the ability to sit with our grief. Now, a growing number of people are reclaiming that power. They seek the ability to face death on their own terms, not for ease or economy. In this movement, families rediscover the beauty in the process, embracing vulnerability and intimacy in the face of loss. They are not just saying goodbye, they are participating in a meaningful ritual. The choice to reclaim this experience is a testament to their love and connection. As they navigate this journey, they are reminded that death, while painful, can also be a deeply human experience, one that